Shalom, shalom, family. Shabbat shalom. Welcome back. We back again today, as promised. We back again. We about to bring out some more history on the people. Before we get started, we're going to give our praises, honor, and glory to our Heavenly Father above, to our Elohim, for giving us the ability to come here today to review this history of his people that ended up in the Americas, scattered abroad by way of the slave wars. All right. So, as you can see by the title today, Israelite History in America, this will be part 4. Today we were going to be touching on the foundation of everything. You know, how really everything started off with our people, how, how we came over here and our ancestors were able to, I guess you could say, to lay a foundation of our Israelite heritage, of our Israelite culture. You know, no matter what they was going through, no matter what they went through, they were still able to preserve a distinct, how can I say? I guess you can say a distinct knowledge of who they were, essentially, right? And that's what we'll be reviewing today, right? The foundation of everything. And of course, Israelite History in America, part 4, we're going to continue to go on this journey together. You know what I'm saying? Review this history that we've been neglected to, hear about. You know what I'm saying? They didn't tell us a lot of the information that was going on during slavery that we will review today. So like I said, and like I always say, it's up to us to, tell us our history, or remember our history, right? Like our ancestors were able to do the way they did. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Make sure everything good on my end, and then we'll begin. All right, so we'll start off in the book of Psalms today, chapters 106, verses 39 through 43 is where we will begin. All right. So it says, thus were they defiled with their own works and went a whoring with their own inventions. All right, so they went whoring with their own inventions. Therefore was the wrath of the Lord kindled against his people, insomuch that he abhorred his own inheritance. So we kindled fire amongst the Most High. We made him anger. We angered him, and he abhorred his own inheritance, right? And he gave them into the hands of the heathen, and they that hated them ruled over them. All right, weren't we ruled over by people that hated us, right? The Gentile nations, the heathen. Their enemies also oppressed them, and they were brought into subjection under their hands. Many times did he deliver them, but they provoked him with their counsel and were brought low for their iniquity. So we see that we were brought low for our iniquity. We were oppressed, and also we were enslaved, and we were hated by the people that ruled over us, as well as we made the Most High abhor his own inheritance. So we're going to review some quick information real quick to see what really was the reason these people were enslaved from the west coast of Africa, right? We know the history of our people. We migrated down. We ended up in West Africa, but why did we get picked up again by slave ships? Why? This book pretty much sums it up perfectly. It states that the 10 tribes of Israel, after they were left to follow the dictates of their own mind and during the commotion and destructive warfare which ensued to escape utter extermination, migrated according to the uses of times in vast numbers into various countries, but principally into Northern Africa, as it presented the fastest and easiest route. All right, the safest and easiest route. Once settled, every commotion and intestine war had the most powerful effect of inducing these bands to shift their abode still further and so lose our connection with the other branch of the tribe. All right, so as hundreds of years pass on, as it says, and after generation rolls away, they lose a great many of their habits and customs. So this is what's going on throughout the migration and throughout the generation and generation. You know, us being amalgamated with native tribes, with the sons of Ham, right, with other Semitic tribes that's in Africa, we're becoming, more loose or turned away from the habits and customs of our ancient ancestors, right? They says it becomes more minglated with the population with which they associate. But when Mohammedanism overspread northern Africa, destroying by fire and sword those of another religion, the Israelite descendants and or the inhabitants occupying the central portion of Africa passed forward seeking shelter to the south and west, right? West Africa and part namely those from the east central, crossing the Benue or Jaliba branch of the Niger, descended gradually southward and became intermingled with the original inhabitants, protected from incursion on the north by the Benue River, and quietly settled between the Great Niger and Old Calabar rivers. All right, so this is where some of the 10 tribes settled, it's telling. And it says they remained in peace and grew from one generation into another into an idolatry. So what do you think was going on when we was growing from one generation to another in idolatry? We was making the Most High mad. We was upsetting him, right? We was sinning against him. So it goes on to say, but they still left tangible proofs in the form of their religion, of their Judaistic origin of the inhabitants. All right. So although they indulged in paganism, they did this, they did that, they still left a couple tangible proofs of who they were. And just like we just read in the previous verse back here, this is the thing that angered the Most High, right? And because of this, he gave them into the hands of the heathen, which we will continue to see. Moving on to Black Jews, the religious challenge, or politics versus religion. We see that it says these factors have a very specific significance if we consider the presence of Judaism among the American Negroes. All right. Remember, we just talked about the 10 tribes migrating down and becoming amalgamated with the tribes, becoming entangled in what was it called? What did they say? I guess you can say paganism and heathen ways and practices. It says that hundreds of thousands of slaves were transported to America from West Africa during the trade, which started 400 years ago. What traces of Judaism still remained amongst the Negroes of West Africa at that period? All right, to the extent that they were persecuted, they were more likely than other Negroes to be seized during wars and sold as slaves. So the Jews in West Africa, they were more likely to be persecuted and seized and sold as slaves. Why was that? It is virtually certain that many part Jewish Negroes were among those sent as slaves to America. How many of them would have been able to conserve some Jewish custom is another question. And we know we wouldn't have been able to, keep those ancient traditions just because we were being oppressed. We wasn't even allowed to keep those customs, as well as we was, converted to Christianity. Not to mention the Inquisition and the Catholic Church. They were going around killing everybody that were practicing Judaic traditions or practicing Judaism, right? That's the whole point of the Inquisition. It says this conclusion put forward by Gabi, which he argues for the existence of a more or less recurring Judaism in West Africa in the same places as those from which the Negroes were taken. All right. It's shared by others such as Maurice de la Fosse, But most significantly, it has been adopted by a class of educated blacks in America as a key argument to demonstrate the Jewish religion is the traditional religion of Africans brought into slavery to the American continent. All right, and this is all what we're going to review today. Shalom, shalom to everybody that's viewing, and shalom, shalom to everybody that will be viewing later. All right, so before we move on, notice it just said that the blacks in America are arguing that the Jewish religion is the traditional religion of Africans brought in slavery to the American continent. Now we finna bring out a source that's saying the same thing. This is Negro folk music in Eastern South Carolina, right? And it tells us literally right here that primitive Negro music may be traced to sources in which can be found points of contact with Judaism and a Jewish type of Christianity. All right. We telling y'all people that we the Jews, we telling y'all we the Israelites. So we should see this, you know what I'm saying? Or we should understand that these people were practicing these types of customs and traditions prior to the slave trade. Continuing. We need to first decolonize our mind. So decolonize your mind real quick. The traditional religion of the American Negro is not a religion, but rather Old Testament customs and culture as outlined in the Tanakh. This is shown through various West and Central African Israelite tribes. After facing curses and harsh bondage, it would have been hard to continue their practices, especially under the eyes of the Catholic Church. However, the knowledge of self, right, which we will be reviewing today, the knowledge of self prevailed, being passed down orally behind closed doors and through the world-renowned Negro spirituals, aka the Songs of Zion. Psalms 137 verse 3, for they that carried us away required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying to us one of the songs of Zion. And it's exactly what the slave masters used to do, right? They did this to our ancestors. They made them sing. And we'll review that. First thing we're going to do right quick to continue to decolonize our mind is jump to this song right here. To jump to this book right here. Black Song, The Forge and the Flame, all right, by John Lavelle. All right, so it says, if the American white man fancies that he was the first to teach the Bible to his black slave, he is quite mistaken, all right? So decolonize your mind. The Europeans did not teach us the Bible. If the white man fancies he was the first to teach his black slave the Bible, he is quite mistaken. A number of African travelers have testified to African acquaintance with the Christian Bible. Joseph, for example, writes of the knowledge by Gambian natives in the early 17th century of Adam and Eve, who they call Adam and Ivahaha, Noah's flood and Moses. Ellis reports that the Vayu priests traditional possesses copies of the New Testament in Arabic. They knew the life of Christ and the principles of the Christian faith. So how in the world are you all going to try to tell us that we had no knowledge of the Bible? Especially when we see that the traditions of these people that came over here was what? Judaism and a Jewish type of Christianity. It gets interesting right here because it tells us that El Sturkey found that Fantoma, the Kafir schoolmaster, had Arabic versions of the Pentateuch, the Psalm of David, and the books of Isaiah. Now, this is important because even in West Africa during the 1500s, 1300s, all that little time leading up to the slave trade, Arabic was like the language of knowledge, right? Arabic was the dominant language, that Arabic was the dominant influence during that time. So a lot of the scholars, a lot of the people with knowledge, they would write in Arabic. And we see that it was people that had the Pentateuch, Psalms of David, and the books of Isaiah in Arabic. Furthermore, it says the unlettered Mandingos, right, entertained him with stories of Joseph and his brethren, Moses, David, and Solomon. They gave out the stories as part of their own folklore and were much surprised to learn that white men had heard of them. So even the Mandingos were telling these European travelers and missionaries about Moses and David like they were their brothers, as if it was their own folklore, right? Because we know that these people are Israel. It says, if many slaves already knew a great deal of the Bible, the whole pattern of the origin and development of the backgrounds of the spirituals in America would have to be reconsidered. All right, and that's what we will be looking at today. Why these people need to reconsider what they were seeing. Right, we're about to look at this history, and we're going to see, right, something very profound that was going on through the history. Before we get started, real quick, Baruch chapter 2, verse 30, verse 27, it says, O Lord our God, thou hast dealt with us after all thy goodness and according to all that great mercy of thine. As thou spakest by the servant Moses in the day when thou didst command him to write the law before the children of Israel, saying, if ye will not hear my voice, surely this very great multitude shall be turned into a small number among the nations, where I will scatter them. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people. All right. When we was in West Africa, when we was in Congo, wherever we was at, wherever we was scattered from, we didn't listen to the Most High because we were a stiff-necked people. But once we were scattered, once we were in the land of our captivities, we remembered themselves, as it said. It says, but in the land of their captivities, they shall remember themselves. And this is what we will be reviewing, how we continue to remember ourselves up to this day. And they shall know that I am the Lord their God, for I will give them a heart and ears to hear. And they shall praise me in the land of their captivity and think upon my name and return from their stiff necks and from their wicked deeds. For they shall remember the way of their fathers which sinned before the Lord. All right. So let's get to it. This far by faith. Starting up top right here where it says, in fact. All right. In fact, several early movements in African-American Jewish community envisioned blacks as the original Jews. Of course, their claims of African ancestry within Judaism raised concerns among white Jews. Nonetheless, the rise and development of African-American Jews illuminates the extent to which African Americans retrieved their own history and configured it with what was handed with them in the New World. The story of African American Jews is about neither their legitimacy nor their accuracy of their claims to a Jewish lineage. It is a story of a people creating a community held together by traditions and beliefs that reinforce their humanity in a society where they are often ignored and maligned. Early scholarship suggests that the interest in Judaism stems in part from three major points, or from 3 points. And the point we will be dealing with today is during slavery. Africans saw themselves literally as the Hebrews of the Old Testament. All right. We just read that these people will think themselves in the land of their captivity. And that's the first point we'll be reviewing. Black Zion. Let's see. Black Zion, African American religious encounter with Judaism. So, some African Americans self-identified as Jews by claiming ties to an exclusive lineage whose roots, many alleged, were in Africa, the spiritual source from which Judaism had emerged. A corollary to these assertions was that the claim that Africa was the geographical foundation, that the land that had produced the Jewish religion, and that the Black people had lost knowledge of their ancestral heritage because of the traumas of slavery and social intermixture. All right. And it also goes into Jeremiah 17, verse 4. And it says, thou even thyself shall discontinue from thine heritage. All right. That I have gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thy enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever. So like this verse says, you shall discontinue from thy heritage. And like this mentioned, all right, the Black people had lost their knowledge of their ancestral heritage because the traumas of slavery and social intermixture. All right, possession and hereditary right to Judaism. All Blacks were therefore obligated to reclaim their religion and their culture. A variety of embellishments on this theme of African Hebrew origins were advanced within Black Jewish traditions. Some leaders conjectured that African lineage of the Jews could be identified in the Hebrewisms in African culture, such as the symbol of the shield of David found inscribed in West African artifacts. All right, the shield of David was found 500 feet in Igbo land, Nigeria. Right, that's just one of the artifacts found. And it says, or could be traced to similar linguistic elements or to parallels between indigenous Africans and Jewish rituals and concepts of law. The terminology is as varied as their numbers. All right, some refer to themselves as Israelites, others as Jews, Hebrews, Canaanites, Essenes, Judites, Rechabites, Philistines, Abyssinians. Although the terminology differs, all such groups perceive themselves as lineal descendants of Hebrew patriots. Several writers have suggested that the ultimate roots of Black Judaism lie in the identification of African American slaves with the Egyptian servitude and liberation of the biblical Hebrews. Above all, it was the compelling sense of identification with the children of Israel and the tendency to dwell incessantly upon and to relive the stories of Old Testament that characterized the religious songs of the slaves. It goes on to say, as Rabatiah concludes, through spiritual music, the slaves' identification with the children of Israel took on an immediacy and intensity which will be difficult to exaggerate. So when these people heard these songs, when these people heard what they were saying, they was like, this could not be exaggerated, right? This is something that is really immediacy. This is something that is really intense. And what we're going to notice is throughout this history, these people continuously said they were the children of Israel. Why? Why? I mean, we know the history of their ancestors, so we should expect this, right? It's not really why. It's why to those who question who we are. You know what I'm saying? It will be why to those who question who we are. But to those who know what we are, we should expect to see this. It goes on to say, in particular, the concept of chosenness captured the spiritual imagination of Blacks. Enslaved African American Christians in the antebellum era had conceived of themselves as a chosen people through the identification with the biblical Jews. Once again, the idea of chosenness was further reinforced in the decades following emancipation. So after emancipation, this same theology continued that what? That they were descendants of the biblical Jews and that they were chosen. Even after emancipation, following emancipation, right? Decades. For some African Americans, identification with the biblical nation of Israel has assumed allegorical or metaphorical significance. Other Blacks have considered themselves to be the only true physical descendants of Israel. Still, others have affirmed their connection to the ancient Israel as members of the Jewish community. Enslaved Black Christians also fashioned vernacular practices out of the Old Testament sources, all right? So they were doing practices out of the Old Testament, expressing their most adherent beliefs and ultimate concerns in oral traditions, all right? Didn't we just do a video on oral traditions? How important oral traditions are and what oral traditions tell us? That's how we know that we come from Israel, because of oral traditions. That's how we know we Israelites now, because of the oral traditions of our ancestors in slavery, right? They told us through the Negro spirituals. And there's even a lot of people that knew that they was Israelites because their grandmother told them. And it's because their grandmother told them, and so forth, so on. So we see this oral tradition still stuck amongst us even to this day. The spirituals, for example, forged in the oral culture milieu made consistent use of biblical imagery. All right, one of the songs that they talked about was Go Down Moses, right? Go down Moses, way down into Egypt land, tell O Pharaoh to let my people go. We all know this, right? Old Testament imagery also infused African American ritual experiences. Black Christians brought the Hebrew Bible to life in African-based practices that had been preserved for generations within the slave community. Wait, what? It says Black Christians brought the Hebrew Bible into life in African-based practices that had been preserved for generations within the slave community. We already started off by bringing out the source that the tradition of these people was Judaism in a Jewish type of Christianity. So what exactly were they doing that was preserved for generations within this slave community? Come on now. It says the slaves believed themselves to be another Israel, but people who toiled in Egypt of North America, but who were providentially guided by the same God who had led the Jews into the promised land. It goes on to say African Americans participated in a reenactment of the Jewish past, claiming Jewish history as their sacred history. All right. Why was our ancestors claiming Jewish history as their sacred history? Right. Because the Most High told us that in the land of our captivities, we shall remember ourselves. Cut loose your stammering tongue real quick. Cut loose your stammering tongue. It says, furthermore, because the black slaves identified themselves with biblical Hebrew slaves. All right. Once more, because the black slaves identified themselves with the biblical Hebrew slaves, and because Yahweh had continued to act in human history, black African American bondsmen and bondswomen maintained hope and certainty for their own deliverance from the cauldron of white American chattel. Consequently, this bewildering chaos, in fact, marked the slaves' developing theology critic from the Bible's powerless voices. So once again, we see time and time again, these people are identifying themselves. Not nobody else. They're telling you that they are these people. And we just saw in the last source that they was picking up the same customs, doing the same customs. Slavery, civil war, and salvation. While the Christian core certainly looked forward to heaven, internal salvation was not their only goal. Slave Christians took hold of the biblical story of the ancient Israelites' exodus from slavery in Egypt and made it their own. All right. Once again, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 15. He said, and the Lord he says, and remember that thou was a servant in the land of Egypt, right? And that the Lord thy God brought thee out of thence through a mighty hand and by a stretched out arm. Therefore, the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Shabbat. The important thing to take out of this, he said, and remember, right? Remember that thou was a servant in the land of Egypt. So even in America, we are remembering that we were in the land of Egypt. We're remembering that we were servants in the land of Egypt. Why? Because we kept taking hold to the biblical story of the ancient Israelites, right? Within Egypt. As it says, slave Christians took hold of the biblical story of the ancient Israelites' exodus from the slavery in Egypt and made it their own, right? It was because it was their own. Literally, they descend from these people. As Albert J. Rabatiah argues, this linkage with Israel gave the slaves a communal identity as a special divinity favored people and foretold of their future deliverance. All right. They said that they would be free from slavery. They foretold of their future deliverance. Slave believers spoke to one another about their anticipated freedom and made it a common feature in their sermons and prayers. All right. Why they didn't teach us this in school? Why they don't teach us this Black History Month? Right. They didn't tell us that our ancestors were anticipating freedom. They didn't tell us that they were basically speaking this into existence, prophesying that they would be right free from slavery. James Williams recalled a devout Christian named Solomon who reacted calmly to ill treatment by his overseer. When asked how he could tolerate such treatment, Solomon replied that it would not always be so, that slavery was to come to an end, for the Bible said so. What verse he talking about? Mingo White believed that the slaves had an instinct that we was going to be free. All right. So the slaves had an instinct that they was going to be free. And as a result, and as a result, they frequently prayed for the Lord to free them like they did the children of Israel. Right? Let me read that again. The slaves frequently prayed for the Lord to free them like they did the children of Israel. Right? Then the scriptures say that we would turn back and we would pray to the Most High for recompense. We see this going on. We see this going on. Shalom, shalom, family. Shalom, shalom. So this is what's going on. This is what was really going on in slavery. And this is why every year in school we only taught about Harriet Tubman. We're not even told the truth about what Harriet Tubman had going on. Right? This is why we only told about Martin Luther King. This is why we always told the same stories. My grandmother was told the same stories about Black history as I was told in school. It's because our ancestors knew who they were, and everything they did was of the Bible. Everything they said was of the Bible, of the Most High, of the children of Israel, of this, of that, which we will continue to see. The Negro preachers preach freedom into our ears, and our old men and women prophesied about it. All right. Like we said, they prophesied about it. Finally, Victoria Perry's mother routinely awakened her by praying and saying, someday we are going to be free. The good Lord won't let this thing go on all the time. All right. We've seen that come to pass. Next book we'll be jumping to, Introduction to the New World and Alternative Religions in America. But once more, it says identification with the Israelites inspired numerous slave rebellions and gave African Americans faith that God would uplift them as he had uplifted the Hebrews in ancient times. This is important for what we're about to go into next. It says identification with the Israelites inspired numerous slave rebellions. All right. So when our people, realized they was Israel, realized who they were, they would start to rebel. They would start to uprise. They would start to get angry. Like, this is not what the scripture says. This is not who we are. We're not Africans. We're not this. We're not that. Right. And like the scripture says, Judah is a lion, and who shall rouse him up? But important thing, it says when they identify with the Israelites, it inspired numerous slave rebellions. So let's get into that. Or let's continue to dig. Rather, the soul of Judaism next is where we're jumping to, Jews of African descent in America. And it says, whether a real ancestral connection to the Israelites, all right? We know we have a real ancestral connection to the Israelites because we actually have the DNA of their ancestors, have the DNA of their people. If you watch the video we did yesterday, we already broke that down. But whether a real ancestral connection to the Israelites existed or was merely imagined, African slaves in North America were uniquely predisposed to identifying with and as the children of Israel. So this was a common thing. This is common knowledge. This should be common knowledge now. It's not common knowledge to us, but to these writers, to these historians, they know that these Negroes were in slavery talking about they children of Israel. As it says, whether a real ancestral connection to the Israelites or if it was imagined, the slaves in North America uniquely predisposed to identifying with and as the children of Israel. While history has characterized the Negro slave in America as unquestionably Christian, most African slaves did not adopt Christianity until the Second Great Awakening, beginning at the dawn of the 19th century. It is not surprising that the sacred world of slave society continued to hold on to many traditional African religious practices, which were drawn both from Islam and the Old Testament. All right, so we can dig on that Islam factor real quick, because we know that 15,000 or 1,500 years before Islam, Judaism was in West Africa. We know that before the Arabs, before the Muslims came to West Africa, the Jews was already there on the trading blocks. The Jews was already in Morocco. They was already in Timbuktu. Right? They was already in the kingdom of Ghana. They was already set up shop in Western Africa. We know the history of what happened in the 1500s, specifically 1492, under the king of Timbuktu, Askia Muhammad the Great, converted all the Jews in the area to Islam. So we know that the tradition of Islam, some of those traditional Islamic practices would have made their way to America as well. Now the question would be, were they Mohammedized Jews or just pure, you know, African Muslims or African Moors? But once again, 1500s, majority of the Jews in West Africa were converted to Islam under Askil Muhammad. But it goes on to say the rich biblical imagery often found the spirituals of slave society and melodizes such still away and swing low. So these songs, they spoke to the strong identification with the children of Israel. That's why I say these songs were actually oral traditions. These were songs, this was information passed down of our heritage, right? Because even these Europeans know, these professors know, these people that are, studying and studied and I guess you can say educated in African American slave history. They know that these songs basically show that they were the children of Israel. As it says, they spoke to strong identification with the children of Israel. They said slaves envisioned a connection between the captivity of the ancient Israelites as their own. Exile, captivity, freedom, and the promised land all became central metaphorical ideas in black religious life. According to Levine, the most persistent single image the slave songs contain is that of the chosen people. Such phrases as "I am born of God," "We are the chosen people," "We are the people of God," and "To the promised land I am bound to go" were commonly invoked, as were references to the biblical heroes such as David, Jonah, Moses, and Daniel. Levine shows that African American religions extended the boundaries of their restrictive universe backwards until it fused with the world of the Old Testament and upward until it became one of the world beyond. It is, in this world where past, present, and future merge, there ever remains the continual possibility of a imminent rebirth. All right, so they're labeling this as a possible imminent rebirth. An imminent rebirth of what? A imminent rebirth of Negroes or of African Americans waking up and we're coming back to their Jewish traditions or to their Hebraic traditions. All right, a rebirth, as the Most High said in Baruch. All right, but let's see. I'm about to play a video for you all real quick, and while I play this video, I'm about to go get my charger before my phone dies. Before my laptop dies. So give me a second, and I will be right back, family.
So the big question for the African community, African Americans, and there's been a lot of discussion over it, is, there are plenty of people who think, well, Judaism came with us to the United States or to the Americas from Africa, and this is something that's widely rejected as being impossible. But I think my research indicates that nothing is impossible. And given that there were plenty of black Jewish communities which had settled long before the beginning of transatlantic slavery, it's entirely possible that there were Jews who were enslaved in the West Coast and, of course, in the East Coast. Not that many slaves came from the East Coast.
And that right there was Professor Tudor Parfit admitting that Israelites, that Jews were sold as slaves from the West Coast, and he even throughout the East Coast. But let's get back to where we were doing. Let's get back to what we were doing. All right, Salakia family, but let's get back to it. All right. So, continuing on, down by the riverside, readings in African American religion, Larry G. Murphy. It says, Black Judaism developed initially in the South in the period after the Civil War. In the Black Jews of Harlem, Howard notes that by the late 1800s, itinerant black preachers were traveling through the Carolinas preaching the doctrine that the so-called Negroes were really the lost sheep of the house of Israel. During this period, there appeared scattered newspapers and magazine references to black members of Jewish congregations in Charleston, New Orleans, and elsewhere in the South. And notice it said that this was in the late 1800s that these preachers were saying that the Negroes were the lost tribes of Israel. Remember, I think we was free 1860, around that time, if I'm not mistaken. But it goes on to say black identification with the biblical Israelites is undoubtedly far older, right? So he's saying that the identification of blacks with the biblical Israelites is far older than the late 1800s, right? Which we just saw, showing that the ancestors were saying that they were Israelites. It says, deprived of their African history, many slaves probably adopted the biblical history of the Israelites as their own. Certainly blacks. Dang, I forgot to put the rest of that, but important to note here that it states that the preachers were preaching that the Negroes were the lost sheep of the house of Israel, specifically in the Carolinas by the late 1800s. That's important when we go to this next source, slave culture, all right? Slave culture, this is by Sterling Stuckey. Now it says, when slaves erected their own house of worship, right? When slaves erected their own house of worship, the African church in the suburbs of Charleston in December of the 1820 or 1821, it was labor that made them more conscious of their dignity and human beings and represented an effort to institutionalize the spiritual autonomy. But there was certainly room for Vesey's brand of Christianity. At the church and at his home, Vesey preached on the Bible, likening the Negroes to the children of Israel. This is 1821. Where did he get this history from? Where did he get this knowledge from? Where did he get this idea from? At the church and in his home, Vesey preached on the Bible, likening the Negroes to the children of Israel, and quoting passages which authorized slaves to massacre their masters. Joshua chapter 4, verse 21 was the favorite citation, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox, sheep, and ass, with the edge of the sword. So this is what Denmark Vesey was on, man. This is what our ancestors were preaching, right? This is 1821. Why were we never taught this in school? That they were telling us that we were the children of Israel and that we were rising up, right? Reading verses like Joshua chapter 4, verse 21. They was on that Django, right? Matter of fact, let me get that clip.
Y'all want to see something?
Come on, man. That's what they was on. That's what our ancestors was on, man. You seen what Denmark Vesey was telling our people, that we need to rise up. He brought out Joshua 7, and he gave them authority to rebel. Furthermore, off the coast of Charleston in 1816, African and European political ideas were united in a manner that anticipated Vesey's uses of the Bible. Indeed, the principles of the Age of Reason and those of African nationalism were joined, illustrating their compatibility for disaffected blacks who sang, "Hail, all hail, ye Afric clan. Hail, ye oppressed, ye Afric band, who toil and sweat in slavery bound. And when your health and strength are gone, are left to hunger and to mourn. Let independence be your aim. Ever mindful, what is tis? Plead your bodies for the prize. Pile them even to the skies, all right? That's history they do not tell us about. It goes on to say that Vesey combined the Old Testament's harsh morality and the stories of the Israelites with African religious customs. All right, that's very important because we saw that he told them that they were the children of Israel. It says, well, let me go back one. It says, indeed, Vesey used Christian radicalism to reinforce and to rationalize his call to arms. Though Vesey's room was full and I did not know one individual in there, right? This is thus says someone else, or I guess somebody sourcing what they saw when he was there, when they was there. It says at this time, or at this meeting, Vesey said we were to take the guard, house, and the magazine to get arms, that we are to rise up and fight against the whites for our liberty. He goes on to say that he was the first to rise up and speak and to read from us the Bible, how the children of Israel were delivered out of Egypt from bondage. All right. And remember, our people kept relating to Egypt, or kept relating back to that Egyptian bondage, because in what? Deuteronomy 5, the Most High said, you will remember when you were service in Egypt. Right? They're using this as motivation, using this as firepower. Like, come on, we got to rise up. We was already slaves in Egypt before. We can do this again. Now, this is very interesting. We're going to start at the very top. This is speaking on something that was written by W.E. Du Bois. It says that the young Du Bois arranged a program to replace his egocentric world by a world centering and whirling about his race in America. It was a transformation that one has reason to believe occurred naturally enough, considering the expectations for him, especially his mother's hopes and his need to fulfill them, and considering the nature of his involvement with his people in the South, all right? Especially those in need of progress. For this group, I built my plan of study and accomplishment. Through the leadership of men like myself and my fellows, we were going to have these enslaved Israelites out of the still enduring bondage in short order. Now, we know that during W.E. Du Bois' time, slavery was not going on. Rather, it probably was. We just didn't know about it. But overall, majority of the African Americans were free, right? But systematically, we were still enduring bondage. We were still oppressed. So therefore, we were still in bondage. So it looks like W.E. Du Bois is kind of hinting towards that same situation. Let me read this again and see if it makes more sense to you all. He says, we are going to have these enslaved Israelites out of the still enduring bondage in short order, right? So they was trying to get them out of that, or help their situation of the bondage that they were still in. It was a battle which might conceivably call for force, but I could think of it mainly as a battle of wits, of knowledge and deed, which by sheer reasoning in the desert must eventually overwhelm the force of hate, ignorance, and reaction. All right, so within this, W.E. Du Bois acknowledges us as Israelites that were still enduring bondage, all right, during his time. That's very important. Continuing on, jumping back to this book right here, Introduction to the New and Alternative Religions in America. Continuing to dig, because once again, we're showing the phenomenon, not really a phenomenon, we're showing the continuation of the Hebrew Israelite culture. We're showing the continuation of the Hebrew Israelites. Everybody wondering where the Israelites went, where they at, where they been at. You've been looking at them the whole time. After everything these people have been through, after everything our ancestors have been through, we can't expect to look at a group of people and see them to be the exact representation of what the Israelites were per se when they first went into the land. because we've been through migration, we've been through wars, we've been through assimilation, we've been through so much different things, but we still been able to keep tangible proofs of who we are, as well as through DNA and those type of ties. But in the 1890s, let's actually start right here. So Christian, a slave in Mississippi, and began preaching at the age 19 in Royal Wrightsville, Arkansas. He preached for 13 years before he received a divine revelation telling him that he had been preaching the doctrine of man, not God, all right? And then began preaching a new doctrine in 1888. Goes on to say in 1889, Bishop Christian founded a small group that he named the Christian Friendship Work, then the Church of God, and finally the Church of the Living God. Those through these churches and the various churches they spawned, Christian taught that the ancient Israelites were black and that the contemporary blacks were descendants from the ancient Israelites. All right. It goes on to say Christian taught that the Adamic people, Hebrews, Jews, Israelites, are black people, right? As we know, Christians' ability to retell the biblical history and to recast African Americans as a chosen people clearly struck a chord among those who experienced slavery one generation earlier. So this was one generation after slavery, right? And we still have Negroes, we still have African Americans, quote unquote, speaking on and teaching that we are the Israelites of the Bible, just like their ancestors that were just saying the same thing in bondage. So now we're starting to bring our way out of bondage, but the message is still being passed down. Now let's do a quick pit stop and let's jump to the Rastafarians, all right? Because just not in America, because they're not in America specifically, that doesn't mean we're not the same people. And I want to show you that, but I want to get into this history because you will see the same exact thing we were doing in America, they were doing down in Jamaica. So let's get a quick background on Rastafarianism. It says the roots of Rastafarianism can be traced to the 18th century, all right? So around the 1700s, when Ethiopianism and other movements that emphasize and idealize Africans began to take hold among black slaves in the Americas. For those who had been converted to Christianity, the Bible offered hope through such passages as Psalms 68 and 31. And let me pause real quick because this just came on my mind. Notice it says that the slaves were converted to Christianity. We just read to start off the video how people in Western Africa had knowledge, you know what I'm saying, of the Bible way before the Europeans came along. So if they already had knowledge of the Bible, why was it that these people tried to convert them or converted us essentially to Christianity if we both knew the Bible? It's because who we were, right? It's because we were the Israelites. And they wanted to get that doctrine, that ideology, that knowledge out of our mind. But restarting, it says, for those who had been converted to Christianity, the Bible offered hope through such passages as Psalm 68:31, foretelling how the princess shall come out of Egypt and Ethiopia, shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. All right, it goes on to say right here that Jamaican preachers began promoting the ruler authority of Selassie over King George V, and by the mid-1930s, it goes on to say that the Ethiopian emperor was regarded by the followers as the living embodiment of God, right? And they was tripping on that highly. I highly disagree with that. But although no formalized central church materialized, the budding factions of Rastafarianism found common ground through their belief in a lineage that dated to ancient Israelites. All right. So before Haile Selassie came over and all that, these people had the understanding that they were descendants of the ancient Israelites. They felt that they were black superiority and that the repatriation of the diaspora from the oppressive land of Babylon, right? So they believed in going back to Africa. They believed that they were ancient Israelites. They believed that America was Babylon, all right? We're going to see that they called, America Babylon, right? So continuing on real quick, searching for Zion, right? Searching for Zion, the book we'll be reading. And it says right here, they and other Rastafarian mansions preach that the stories of the Old Testament refer to Black Africans who descended from Jewish fathers, Abraham and Jacob. White Christians, they believe, altered the facts and keep Africans in a subordinate position. All right. So even the Rastafarians in Jamaica taught from the Old Testament and taught that blacks were descendants from Jewish fathers. Goes on to say down here that some people consider Rastafari a third world millennium Jewish sect. Not only are the Rasta Zionists, but their identifying dreadlocks are inspired by the same Nazarite vows, or the Nazarite vows that expired the side locks of Hasidim. All right, and their idol foods is influenced by the same Old Testament laws as kosher diet. All right, and even down in Jamaica, I find that very fascinating, and I find it very good as well that they were able to keep the dietary laws. Even up to this day, they still keep the dietary laws. They was keeping the dietary laws in slavery, right? The Rastas. But let's go back real quick to reread something. And it says right here, they identified their identifying dreadlocks are inspired by the same Nazarite vows that expired the side locks of the Hasidim. All right. And my question is, who did it first? Right? Who did it first? Who did it first? Hold on real quick. Let me read this comment. Oh, yeah. You're right. You're right. Native Americans, Mexicans, Latinos, they aren't Israelites, right? They aren't Israelites. We already dealt with that. And yeah, we destroyed them plenty of times on this channel. They not our people. But going back to the presentation, like it says, the Jamaicans were associated with the side locks. But my question is, who started it? We know that around the 1800s, 1790 something is when the Ashkenazi Jews started coming in contact with the Jews in Africa. We know that when the Ashkenazi Jews converted to Judaism, they were, going into Egypt, going into Ethiopia, going into Yemen, looking for Black Jews to teach them the Torah, teach them the law. So my question would be is, who actually started this? I would say it was our people, right? That's just an example. Here's more examples. Number 6 and 5, you can read that verse real quick. That's just a verse showing you one of the vows that was amongst the Levites, right? So my question would be, who started this, us or the Ashkenazim? And like I say, I believe it was definitely us. But going back, goes on to say, do you think of yourself as Jewish? This is what the author asked. And one of the Rastafaris replied, we not Jewish. Culture corrected my language yet again. We Jews. I wasn't surprised by his assertion. The African Hebrew Israelites told me the same thing back in the Negev desert, picking and choosing passages from the Bible to prove it. All right, it goes on to say, if Jamaica was the Rastafarians' land of captivity, which we know it was, because they were exiled there, it says it followed that they were its Hebrew people. Let me read that again. If Jamaica were the Rastafarians' land of captivity, it followed that they were its Hebrew people. So even in Jamaica, even in America, right, we have Negroes saying that they are descendants of the ancient Israelites, right? Why is that? Why is that? Shalom, shalom to everybody in the chat just now tuning in. But again, why is it that we have Negroes scattered in the Western world all saying that they come from ancient Israelites? Because this is the foundation of what we have today. Next source, it goes on to say that Black Israelites are African Americans who practice religions based on Judaism or the belief that they are descendants from the lost tribes of Israel. All right. Goes on to say variously known as Black Hebrews, Black Israelites, or Black Jews. Black Israelite movements spawn a range of religious forms, from holiness, Christianity, Orthodox, and Judaism, and have appeared from the 1890s to present. All right. And I definitely disagree with that. Whenever they say they brought us over here, was it 1619, 1492? I say that's when Black Judaism started. Whenever we touch foot to present, right? But jumping down here, it says that, what should we start? It says that Israelite holiness churches in the South from 1890 to World War I, Israelite sects and synagogues in northern cities such as Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia in the 1920s, and Israelite sects in places such as Chicago, New York, and Miami from 1921 to 1980. Black Israelites of the 1920s arose in the same context and shared influences and theology elements with early Black Muslims, all right? By adopting Israelite and Muslim identities, African Americans associated themselves with the East, and therefore, by challenging the Eurocentric racism of Jim Crow era, right? So this is important because we saw basically the rise of Israelite congregations in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, right? And Miami, even South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, right? We also had the same thing going on the West Coast, but all of this started right after slavery, the early 1900s, even up to 1980s, as we see. So, continuing on, it says that Black Israelites led to the rise of Father Divine's 1882 through 1965 movement and the development of the Jamaican Rastafarian movement in the 1830s, which built on elements of their teachings. In addition, Black Israelites' development of an Afrocentric interpretation of biblical history that more popularly Black Muslim groups incorporated into their teachings, all right? And we know that, Rizza Islam, he know that we are Israelites. He said we're Israelites. We know that Malcolm X knew that we were Israelites. We know that Farrakhan know that we are Israelites. We know that all these so-called Muslims know that we are Israelites by blood. They choose to be Muslim by faith, though. That's them. Let them do what they do, but they know that we are Israelites by blood. And that's why it says right here that Black Muslim groups incorporated Israelite teachings into their teachings. Goes on to say African Americans and West Indians developed Black Israelism as a nationalism or transnational religion that borrowed liberally from English religious thought, though, as well as European Freemasonry. And even with that, the first African American lodge in America was founded by a Black Sephardic Jew, right? Prince Nero. He started the first African American free lounge, and he was a Black Sephardic Jew. I believe he was from Russia. But it goes on to say Black Israelites placed Africa at the core of Western history and Western religion mythology by claiming that Africans and their descendants in America were the progeny of the ancient Israelites, as we are. All right, so this claim has been out since we've been here, right? We've been saying who we are. This is not nothing new. It goes on to say this transnational focus on Africa created a transnational church network and settlement attempts in Africa. All right, so our people been trying to go back to Africa. We've been doing this stuff nationally. It says Black Israelites settled in Ethiopia in 1930. When did they tell us about Israelites going to Ethiopia to settle? In 1930. All we know about is the Black Jews of that went into Liberia and later into Jerusalem. Right? So Black Israelites settled in Ethiopia in 1930 and in Liberia in 1967. So the first place they settled was in Ethiopia. Early Black Israelite churches spread their teachings to South Africa as early as 1903 and helped to create the African Zionist or Ethiopian churches that spread oppositional forms of Christianity and challenged European colonial rule. Come on now. Do y'all understand what we are reading? How in the world that we have so much influence in America, right? That Black Israelite churches spread their teachings to South Africa. Don't we know that it's Jews in South Africa? Don't we know about the Shona, the Limba, the Zulu? Right? As early as 1903, and helped to create the African Zionists or Ethiopian churches that spread oppositional forms of Christianity and challenged Ethiopian colonial rule. And even that right there, that goes into the Balfour massacre of South Africa, where 200 Hebrew Israelites were massacred by European colonial police. And who was the leader of that Black Israelite congregation in South Africa? A Black Jew from the United States. Come on now. We don't know our history. What is Negroes doing going to Africa, starting congregations? Right? Why is 200 Israelites being popped up dead by a mob of 800 European police in South Africa? That's a whole nother video right there. The Balfour massacre, South Africa. That's you all's homework. Do some independent research on that, all right, family? Now let's get into some of these early rabbis that would have been descendants of these slaves teaching and passing down the oral traditions that they were Israelites, all right? And the first rabbi is Rabbi Arnold J. Ford, right? Rabbi, he was a rabbi, a Black nationalist, right? And an immigrationist, was born in Bridgetown, Barbados, the son of Edward Ford and Elizabeth, right? Notice he was a Black nationalist. Ford asserted that his father's ancestry could be traced to the Yoruba tribe of Nigeria and his mother to the Mende tribe of Sierra Leone. This is 423 is me. This is before ancestry. This is before a mouth swab. This is through his oral tradition. He was able to remember, to recall that his father was from the Yoruba. We know the Yoruba from the Northern Kingdom. We know the Mende are Israelites as well. According to his family oral history, their heritage extended back to one of the priestly families of the ancient Israelites. And in Barbados, his family maintained customs and traditions that identified them with Judaism. That's very interesting. We just went over this. In 1917, Marcus Garvey founded the New York chapter of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA. And within a few years, it had become the largest mass movement in African American history. Arnold Ford, right? Rabbi Arnold Ford became the musical director in the UNIA choir. All right, so Rabbi Joshua Ford, the Black Jew, was the musical director in Marcus Garvey's UNIA. It gets deeper though. Samuel Valentine was the president, and Nancy Paris was its leader. These were all prominent Black Jews. Samuel Valentine, Rabbi Ford. These three became the core of an active group of Black Jews within the UNIA. They didn't tell us about the Jews in the UNIA. They didn't tell us about the Black Jews in the UNIA. It says they studied Hebrew, religion, and history and held services at the Liberty Hall, the headquarters of the UNIA. So what services were they holding at the UNIA? They was up there, probably doing Shabbat services at the UNIA headquarters, Passover at the UNIA headquarters. Who knows? Because they never taught us this, right? Let me read this again. These three became the core of an active group of Black Jews within the UNIA who studied Hebrew, religion, and history and held services at the Liberty Hall, the headquarters of the UNIA. So now we're starting to get a little understanding of where Marcus Garvey got his message from. Why was he so Zion this, so Zion that, so back to Africa this, so back to Africa that? because he was rocking with black Jews. He was rocking with people that knew they was Israelites. Marcus Garvey knew he was an Israelite as well. Ford's contributions to the UNIA, however, were not limited to musical and religious matters. He and E.L. Gaines wrote the Handbook of Rules and Regulations for the Preliminary African Legion, which was modeled after the Zionist Jewish Legion, and developed guidelines for the Black Cross nurses. All right. So even Rabbi Joshua Ford, who was in the UNIA, he wrote the rules and the regulations for the UNIA, which was modeled after the Zionist Jewish Legion. We don't even know the history of the UNIA. Come on now. Next, Rabbi Matthew, man, Chief Rabbi Matthew. He is a rabbi, educator, and is to believe have been born in St. Mary's in the British West Indies. He's the son of Joseph Matthew and Francis M. Matthew gave seemingly contradicting accounts of his ancestry and put his place of birth in such places as Ethiopia, Ghana, and Lagos in Nigeria. Some of those lingering discrepancies were partially clarified when Matthew explained that his father, all right, Rabbi Matthew, Rabbi Matthew explained that his father was a cobbler from Lagos who was the son of an Ethiopian Jew, a cantor, who sang their traditional liturgies near the ancient Ethiopia capital of Gondar. All right, Matthew's father then married a Christian woman in Lagos, and they gave their son Winford the Hebrew name Yosef ben Moshe ben Yehuda, and given as Moshe ben David. His father died when he was a small boy, and his mother took him to live in St. Kitts, where he had relatives who had been slaves on the island. All right. So Rabbi Rinsworth was a descendant of an Ethiopian Jew who ended up moving to West Africa. Father ended up dying. They ended up coming to the Americas, right? This is all going to be important. We'll be getting to the next couple of literatures. All right, so this is an article coming from forward.com. No, brother. No, these brothers aren't converts. None of our people were converts, really. And even if they did convert, it's really not a conversion. It's them converting to the European Jews' religion, right? Because we don't have to convert to anything. We are blood descendants. It's a reawakening for us. You get what I'm saying? So you do have instances of black Jews converting to rabbinical Judaism, converting to the Judaism of the Ashkenazim. But like I said, we are born Israelites. Like, we are the progeny of the Israelites. So it's just a reawakening thing for us and turning back. But this is an article from Forward, and it says, on Jerusalem wall, artists memorialize black rabbi from Harlem. So what is a black rabbi from Harlem doing on the walls of Jerusalem if we not Israelites? Why would they put a face of a black Jewish rabbi, right, on the walls in Jerusalem if we not Israel? The post or the picture that they made was of Rabbi Herman, all right? Rabbi Herman was a part of a generation of influential African-American spiritual leaders of the 1920s and 1930s, a time when New York City black population was swelling during their exodus from the South, known as the Great Migration, all right? And even during the Great Migration, the people on the Great Migration was passing the same message, that they were the children of the Bible. It was during these years that the Black Hebrew Israelite movement took shape. Herman, like his peers, preached that the Black Americans had ancient ties to the biblical Israelites and that they should return to their Hebraic way of life. And let me go back real quick just so y'all can see. Right here to your left, this is Rabbi Herman, right? Harlem, New York. And this is the mural that was done of him in Jerusalem. But like it says, he preached that Black Americans had ancient ties to the biblical Israelites and that they should return to their Hebraic way of life. He urged his Black congregants to stand in solidarity with pre-state Zionists, all right? Listen, brother, it is my present belief that Palestine will be free, he wrote at the time in a Hebrew language flyer, all right? It is a fact that our Jewish brothers in Europe and America cannot hold and defend Palestine, all right? Listen to what he's saying. It is a fact that our Jewish brothers in Europe and America cannot hold and defend Palestine, but our Black Jewish brothers in India and China and Abyssinia have a little more skill in warcraft than the normal and heroic Jew. All right, Herman died in 1920. All right, so I just showed you all about three prominent rabbis: Rabbi Ford, Rabbi Matthew, and here Rabbi Herman. All right, and he also was the rabbi of the Moorish Zionist Temple of the Moorish Jews. All right, and I just wanted to show this one specifically because he was memorized or commemorated all the way in Jerusalem. So that's very interesting. That's something for us to think about. Why is a Black Jew from America being memorized on the walls in Jerusalem? All right, but let's continue on. Jumping back to Black Zion. All right, jumping back to Black Zion. So it says some Blacks in the new urban communities were consistent in their understanding of Judaism as a religion with a special appeal to African American people. This emphasis may have derived from a strong national orientation of some Black Jewish leaders and their constituents. All right, Rabbi Mordecai Herman, the rabbi we just reviewed. Right, so Rabbi Mordecai Herman, a member of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. So this is the third, fourth rabbi, right? Third, fourth Black Jew we see associated with Marcus Garvey's movement. That's very important. Did they not think that we would want to know this history? Did they not think we would want to know about the participation of Israelites in the movement of Marcus Garvey? I know these people see me live. They want to keep calling me. Come on, bro. But Salakia for that, family. But did they not think that we would want to hear about the history of Israelites influencing Marcus Garvey's UNIA movement, right? We saw that Rabbi Ford had them in there doing Shabbat services. Well, it didn't say that, but it says hosting services, right? Reading the scripture. And he even did what? He wrote the guidelines and the rules and regulations modeled after the Black Jews ones, right? So we see a heavy influence of Israelites within the UNIA, but it gets deeper. It says that he was the organizer of the Moorish Zionist Temple of New York, when he was one of the first African Americans to endorse the establishment of a shared homeland for Black Jews and others in Palestine. Come on now. So Rabbi Herman, a member of Marcus Garvey's UNIA, was the first African American to endorse the establishment of a homeland for Black Jews in Palestine. This was 100 years, 80 years before the establishment of Palestine. This was in the 1800s, right? Excuse me, early 1900s. So it was probably about 40 years, 30 years. This was in the early 1900s that Rabbi Herman was endorsing that African Americans should move back to Palestine, right? This was before the Ashkenazim came into the land. You had Black people arguing, fighting for us to go back to Israel. We even have documentation, legit documentation of letters written back and forth from the people in Israel and Martin Luther King about African Americans repatriating to Africa. And we're going to do a specific video on that because it's a lot. But continue on. Another African-American rabbi, Arnold Joshua Ford, was particularly active in the Garvey movement at Liberal Hall, the New York headquarters of the UNIA. Both Herman and Ford recruited Garveyites into their respective congregations, all right, which included a sizable contingent of West Indian immigrants. Some African Americans self-identified as Jews by claiming ties to an exclusive lineage whose roots many alleged were in Africa, the spiritual source from which Judaism had emerged. All right, we know Judaism emerged out of Africa. But important thing to notice, to take from this, that Rabbi Herman was the first African American to vouch for us to go back to Palestine. So the Black Jews of Harlem, representation, identity, and race. It says, finally, an ethnic pattern appears among Harlem's Black Jews. All right, and before we continue on, we've made our way out of slavery of the Israelites, you know what I'm saying, remembering themselves, as Baruch said, you know, telling you people, or telling, I guess you can say, telling the world that they were Israelites at the time, self-identifying as Israelites and passing that down orally. We made our way out of slavery into the early 1900s and seeing this same thing roll over where Negroes are saying that they are Israelites. But it says the leadership and the congregates were markedly West Indian or otherwise foreign born. Most of them come from East Africa or South America. Observe an early report on Beth Benai Abraham. Arnold Ford, the congregation's rabbi, was educated in Barbados, South America, and Bermuda. The Samuel Valentine family, which affiliated early on with Ford's congregation and later saw a daughter, Vatarella, serve as valedictorian of the institution's synagogue, Talmud Torah class, had immigrated from Jamaica. Morris Zionist professor Richalieu traced much of the congregations to Eastern countries. So that's very interesting. So when she traced them to Eastern countries, she said that there are a number of Yemen Jews, Moroccan Jews, Egyptian Jews, Abyssinian Jews, and about 200 all told. She said that Richarlio was born in Cairo, Egypt, and Rabbi Hermes came from Morocco. So a more exclusive history surrounding Rabbi Winsor A. Matthew, the commandment keeper leader and the Black Jew, was most often interviewed. So this is very interesting because this was getting into some of the different places these people was coming from in these congregations within Harlem. And she said, or they said, that there was a number of Jews from Yemen, and we have sources verifying that, right? That's what I'm saying. We have a lot of history to dig into, family. So please stick around. We're not bringing it out in this video, but in further videos, we have information proving that Yemenite Jews were in Harlem. We have sources proving that Moroccan Jews were in Harlem. We have sources that proven Egyptian Jews were in Harlem, right? We even brought out a source on, what was his name? Sam Johnson, who was in jail, who was in prison, right? And he recited the Passover speech and he was let go. He was an Egyptian Jew. We have sources of Abyssinian or Ethiopian Jews in Harlem as well. So like I said, just make sure you stick with me. In the future, we will bring out some information on that. But jumping back to searching for Zion, the quest for home in the African diaspora. We're going to start at the very top. It says, in spite of his stature today, at the time of his death, Marcus Garvey was ridiculed as a failure. During his lifetime, the Harlemite from Jamaica built the largest Pan-African mass movement in history, referred to as the Zionism of the Black race. And remember who was the backbone, right, of his congregation? Those Black Jews. And notice the name of his movement, the Zionism of the Black race. Because even the Black Jews were, what do you call it, Pan-Africanists. They were promoting back to Africa as well. The same thing Garvey was doing. His brainchild, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, aimed to unite Black people with the vision of common origin, a common destiny, and a common homeland, Africa. Speaking at a UNIA rally at Madison Square Garden in 1920, he said, all right, so I just want to speak on this as well. This is the type of influence our ancestors had. Y'all Negroes not speaking at Madison Square Garden. Y'all Negroes not trying to repatriate us. Y'all Negroes not trying to go to war with the white man to better our situation. Y'all would rather stand on the street corners and yell at the white man, right? Y'all would rather put your faith in things that cannot save you. We have to save ourselves. But he said, we shall organize the 400 million Negroes of the world into a vast organization to plant the banner of freedom on the great continent of Africa. We say to the white man who now dominates Africa that this is in his interest to clear out of Africa. Not because we are coming, all right? And we know we got to return back to Africa. The Most High says so. And we went to retake we mean to retake every square mile of the 12 million square miles of the African continent that belongs to us by the right divine. All right, it says they would get there the same way they left, by boat. All right. But this time the journey would be a jubilant turnabout on the Middle Passage. UNIA visionary Black Starship Line was meant to capitalize upon a global African economy in its aims to transport Black goods and Black people, all right? So these people literally started a boat line, right? The Black Star Shipping Line, which was aimed to transport Black goods and Black people. The Black Star Line was branding Zion as both a geographical and financial realm. The shipping line collapse was a result of a mismanagement and of sabotage by J. Edgar Hoover, all right, within the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So if you know the history of J.F. Hoover, you know the history of Marcus Garvey, you know that the rise of the Black Messiah was to stop what Marcus Garvey was doing, as we just read. Now, this gets even more deeper because we know that Marcus Garvey was learning from Rabbi Ford, was learning from Rabbi Herman, was learning from these prominent Black Hebrew Israelites. And the president literally started a whole movement to sabotage what we had going on, called Stop the Rise of the Black Messiah. What was Marcus Garvey's middle name? Messiah. What was he empowering? Israelites to go back to Africa. Before people stopped listening, Garvey preached that European colonizers had seized the African continent and scattered its population throughout the Western world under the yoke of slavery. He was considered a prophet by his followers, whose membership in the UNIA was said to represent 40 countries and they number in the millions. All right, so this is what I'm saying. You Negroes not about what our ancestors was about. All right, y'all don't have the influence. Y'all don't have the pull no more. All right, and this is what we have to get back to. He literally represented 40 countries and millions of people. This was in the 1920s. And I'm going to keep saying this. Remember who he was learning from, the Black Jews, Rabbi Ford, Rabbi Herman. He goes on to say, he endowed them with noble ties, patriotic rituals, and a parliamentary legion, all right? And remember who wrote the rule book for the legion, Rabbi Ford, describing the spiritual freedom in the following words. No one knows when the hour of Africa's redemption comes. It is in the wind. It's coming one day like a storm, and it will be here. A galvanizing orator, he told blacks to look to Africa for the crowning of a king, to know that your redemption is near. Africa will be the promised land for its scattered children. All right, so that was what our ancestors was on. So jumping to Black Jews in Africa right quick. Jumping to Black Jews in Africa right quick. So starting right here, it says Jews confronted with black Jews from Harlem, for instance, did not know what to make of them. All right. So the European Jews that was confronted with the black Jews in Harlem did not know what to make of them. All right. The New York Sunday of January 29th, 1929 reported that Mr. M. Sharpio, a mild-mannered Jewish businessman, stopped to chat a few moments with his kosher butcher. The butcher was chuckling. Funny thing, he explained some colored people came in this morning and he wanted some kosher meat. Real Negro people are from Harlem. They say the real Jews, or excuse me, they say they are Jews. He laughed. All right. So this is just an example of like it says, it was in the New York Sunday Times paper, and it was just a reference of black Jews being in Harlem. As it says, the store owner or the butcher was chuckling over a funny thing. He explained some colored people came in this morning and wanted some kosher meat. Real Negro people up in Harlem, and they say that they are Jews. All right, he laughed. Continuing on right here, it says, one Jewish observer noted that the Negro Jews in Harlem claim to be full-blooded Jews of color, as we do today. They use the Orthodox prayer book and pray in the same singing song voice that someone is accustomed to hear in synagogues of Eastern Europe. Even in the hearing, favorite food of poor Lithuanians has been found this way in the dining of these Negro Jews. So even some of these Jews in Harlem, and this goes into what Zoe was asking. This is an example of them taking on some of their culture, as it says right here. Even the hearing, favorite food of poor Lithuanians has found its way into the dining of these Negro Jews. So they started eating some of the foods them Lithuanian Jews were eating because they did dwell in the same communities. Black Jews and white Jews lived amongst each other in New York and as well as in Charleston, South Carolina, and other places. So it was a culture exchange sometimes. But it goes on to say there has attained or there it has attained a prominence never reached among white Jews. All right. So there was a prominence attained that the white Jews never reached. It has become almost part of the ritual. All right. So the black Jews obtained a prominence that the white Jews never reached within Harlem. Now we're about to get ready and wrap it up with this last source right here. And it pretty much sums up what we just read and what the Most High told us, basically, right? We were stiff-necked. We was punished. In the land of your captivity, you're going to remember yourself. And that's what we've been seeing since we've been here. Rabbi Earl Bowen Jr. speaks about African-American Jewish history. Source coming from the Jewish Exponent. He says this. Bowen traced the origins of black Jews in America, noting that the first African-American Jewish communities formed in the later half of the 19th century. The ancestors of those people had been slaves taken to the United States and converted to Christianity. At the time, they began to equate biblical stories about the plight of Jewish people as slaves in Egypt to their own experiences. Slowly, they began to adopt Jewish customs. All right, you can't adopt something they already had, right? Starting their own congregations in the early 1900s. Interestingly enough, he goes on down here to say that there is a bit of evidence to support the idea that some slaves were Hebrews before they were brought to the United States. All right. And that's all we've been saying. That's all we've been saying, that it was Israelites brought into the slave trade. All right. There was Jews brought into the slave trade. All right. Not keeping traditions doesn't make you not a Hebrew. All right. You're a Hebrew by blood. It says that culture, however, was destroyed along with the rest of the cultural identities of the slaves. So, in sense, Bowen said, blacks embracing Judaism is a revitalization of the point of view and a continuation of history that was once lost. All right. So that sums up everything. Blacks embracing Judaism in America, in Jamaica, in Brazil, in Haiti, that is nothing but a continuation of a history that was once lost. All right. And there you have it. And if anybody has any questions, anything to say, go ahead and drop them in the chat. Let's see if anybody want to hop on. I'll throw the link in the bio or link in the chat for you all. If anybody want to hop on and ask any questions live. But again, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat box or hop on. Stick around for a couple minutes real quick. Right. I agree with that. Then again, getting into the history of the Talmud, it could be tricky, right? Because we do have information basically saying that the Ashkenazim needed some help learning the Talmud as well. So it seems like, from my research, it seems like the Talmud was around prior to the Ashkenazim, but when the Ashkenazim got their hands on it, that's when things started to get altered and changed and all that stuff. Because even Eldad the Danite says, when he was in speaking on the tribes in West Africa, it said that they had their own Talmud, right? Which is nothing but like a book of oral traditions, book of laws. So they had their own Talmud, but it had like the Psalms of David and different verses and books in it, right? So we did have some form of Talmud or traditional book, but I definitely believe that the one we see today is not the original. Although it does admit that the 10 tribes went into Africa and settled beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. So we do have that proof, thanks to the Ashkenazim. But once again, anybody got any questions, anything, drop them in the chat. Toda for tuning in to the video. Hope you all enjoyed it, as well as I hope you all are enjoying your Shabbat and your Sabbath day. All right. But again, next week we'll probably be getting into the connections between the Bantus and guess you can say the Igbos, the Yoruba, the Ga, all these other tribes in Western Africa. We're gonna show how they all are the same. But question right here: do you think it was the black rabbis of the late 1800s, or was it Marcus Garvey who inspired the FBI's counter-pro? I believe it was Marcus Garvey, but again, I believe Marcus Garvey got his teachings and all that from Rabbi Ford, from Rabbi Herman, the black Jews of those congregations. Because as it said, they was hosting different ceremonies at the town hall. They wrote the rules and regulation books that was based off the Hebrew, based off the I guess you can say their laws and stuff that they were doing. And then again, we also have a situation where Rabbi Ford and Marcus Garvey actually had a falling out, right? And that falling out was because Rabbi Ford felt as if he wasn't being given credit for a lot of the things he was doing. And once again, that's going to have to come with another video. But so there is something there deeper. But definitely, I believe that Marcus Garvey did get a lot of his teachings from those early rabbis, because the early rabbis were the first Pan-Africanists. All right, quick question. And we tell a part of the Ethiopian Jews with the real blood Jews because they do have different feelings. Can you rephrase your question, bro? I'm not getting it. And can we tell apart the Ethiopian Jews with the real blooded Jews because they do have different phenotypes? Oh, okay, I get your question. I actually got a video on my channel of a video of Ethiopian Jews in the early 1900s, and they look like us, right? So it's some of those Jews in Ethiopia are like literally descendants of, I guess you could say, Cush. Some of them are descendants of Shem, right? So within the Ethiopian people, you have some that are Israelites, and you have some that just are Semites, and you have some that are Hamites. So it's just a big cluster. But you do have some who would look like your Bantus, who would look like your Igbos, who would look like your Yoruba. But of course, they've been mixing with those people in that land over there. So some of them probably look different. They probably look more Ethiopian than sub-Saharan African Bantu, if that answers your question. And yes, I am familiar with Sammy Davis, who converted to who converted to Judaism. This is another example of, this is one of the examples of what the brother Zoe was talking about earlier. So this is an example of our people converting to, I guess you can say, Orthodoxy or Rabbinical Judaism. The example would be Sammy Davis Jr. It's also a lot of other examples of our people converting. And again, our people, I don't know why they convert, honestly. I can't answer that question. But again, anybody else got any more questions before we head out? If not, we're going to wrap this up. Any video suggestions, any history anybody want to get into, anything anybody want to know about, throw it in the comment box and we're going to get to it. Also, to mention real quick regarding one of the rabbis, I forgot to bring one out, but we do actually have another rabbi who was a descendant, who was actually adopted by a rabbi in America who was of Ethiopian Jewish descent. I mean, yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. But once again, like some things our people do, you know what I'm saying, we can't explain for ourselves. We just gotta try to understand the situation, or we really need them here to explain it better for what was going on. Because again, I wouldn't convert to Judaism. I wouldn't convert to Orthodoxy or anything. Because like I said, we are the progeny. We are their descendants. So there's no need for conversion. Just like they was trying to tell the Igbos, in order for you to come back to Israel, you have to convert to Judaism. Like, what? How does that make sense? This is the oldest Israelite community in the world. Would you have to convert to Judaism? No. Yeah. Okay. So, question, and I know it was hard to be in touch, but is there any people in Brazil, in the Dominican Republic, basically the whole West Indies? Yes, yes, yes. A lot of the Sephardic Jews were expelled to Brazil, right? A large population went to Brazil. You also have a large population of slaves from West Africa that went to Brazil. So Brazil would actually have the largest Israelite population outside of Africa, right? Just because they have the cluster of Sephardics and they have the cluster of African Israelites coming in. So there's definitely a lot of Israelites in Africa, and we even have Jewish African tombstones found in the West Indies. Let me see if I can get that real quick. And then we're gonna wrap it up. And yes, I agree. That's what I agree. I agree that we all we need is scripture and faith. But it seems like a lot of the stuff we've did has been I guess you can say taken, hijacked, and twisted, right? Because like I said, we did have a form of a Talmud. We did have a form of oral traditions. But as we can see, that is clearly hijacked today. All right. And this right here is a picture. Let me see if I can share my screen real quick. Just going into the brother Zoe question. This is just like more proof of the Israelite presence in the West Indies. This would be something to get into. Right. So this is coming from this book right here. What's the book called real quick? Jews and the Expansion of Europe to the West, 1450 to 1880. Page 433, we see that. Matter of fact, let me go back to the reading of it. 1 second. Let me find what page number that was on, so we can get an understanding of the picture. We're looking at. So I'm just not showing you. So let's jump to 426 real quick. So 426. All right here. So in the 19th and 20th century, in the 19th and 20th century, Sephardic cemetery in Paramaribo, right? So wherever this is in the West Indies, in Paramaribo, the heart-shaped Sankofa and Akoma symbols appear, coinciding with the Star of David, the Hebrew name of the deceased, and the typical Sephardic flat horizontal tomb. However, gone are the alliterative engraved images. All right, here the horizontal stone tomb, European in origin, are joined by a specular art of African origin, thereby forming the only unique Jewish African style of tomb known in the New World. So we're going to look at a Jewish African tombstone, and this is just evidence of that right here. Star of David, Sephardic Cemetery. And this is a Jewish African tombstone that was found in the Sephardic Cemetery. So once again, we have plenty of proof. We have archaeological evidence that we can dig into, And I'm thinking about doing a specific video for the West Indies, going into the history. Can't forget about our people down there in Haiti. Oh yeah, I got you real quick, bro. Perfect indeed. I wish Haiti had more Jews. History on the Jews. Let me bring something out for you real quick. Then we're gonna wrap it up because we have information letting us know that Jews were shipped directly to Haiti, and it didn't say Africans. It said Jews specifically. So let me find that video or that source. Right, here we go. So let this load. Then I'm gonna share the screen and show you that. And if anybody have any more questions, we gonna get out of here after I show him this source. So here we go right here. Let me share my screen for the bro. Right, so this coming from this book right here. Healing in the Homeland, Haitian Voodoo Tradition, Margaret Mitchell Armand. All right. This is one of examples right here. It says Jewish captives in the continuing war against Moorish cities and Muslim slaves were sold in a Valencia market. This may account for Jews and Africans sold in the slave markets in the early years before the Spanish invasion of the New World. All right. So Jews and Africans sold in the slave markets in the New World. But this is where it gets into Haiti. It tells us that the European Christians arrived in 1492, already accustomed to slavery. What happened in 1492? The expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal, right, as described above, and they cold-bloodedly enslaved the indigenous peoples who lived on the islands. All right, we know that they enslaved the the Native Americans, right? It says they explained at the beginning of the conquest, every Spaniard was allowed to take with him an enslaved person from his European community, and the number rose to later to 20 enslaved peoples per Spaniard. All right, so before I continue, remember 1492, the Inquisition was going on. The Black Jews was expelled, right? And notice that this just said that in the beginning, Spaniards were allowed to take with them enslaved persons to wherever they went. So who you think they was taking with them? These Black Sephardic Jews. So here we go right here, Brother Zoe. It says, at that time, Jews purchased from the slave markets were taken to Haiti. All right. And we're going to get a whole video out on the the West Indies and all that for y'all brothers, all right, down there. Because you're right, we do need to bring out some more history on that, you know what I'm saying, down there. So, Toda. All right, are you aware of a specific DNA test that might help us reveal more about our Hebrew heritage? All right, my African test just said a con. If you could find out your haplogroup, that'll be great. If you could find out your haplogroup, that'll be great. But if you're a con, more than likely you're E1B1A. There's nothing much more to learn about that, bro. You know what I'm saying? If you want to know more about the Akan specifically, you know what I'm saying, the tribe you come from, you can go look at my videos. What was it? Akan Israelite history, and the videos I did called The Movement of the Akan from Canaan to Ghana. All right, the Akan, they know who they are. They know they Israelites. They claim to be descendants of Judah, all right, Gad, as well as Levi. And they have oral tradition from coming from the Babylonian captivity under the high priest Zorobabel. So it's a lot to go on with the Akan. So as far as if you want to, I guess you can say no more. I would say download your file. If you did like 23andMe or African Ancestry, go download that file and upload it to a site called GEDmatch, and it will show you a little bit more. It'll take you, I guess you can say, back to more ancient populations. All right. So, for example, I was helping a brother out, and his information went back to the Natufians. All right. And that's just more proof that we are who we say we are, because the Natufians are the earliest inhabitants of the Levant. The Natufians also are the ancestors of the Semitic speaking peoples. They are the first Semites. So for this brother to share DNA with the Natufians proves that we are who we say we are, because the Israelites would have shared DNA with the Natufians, right? And if you was watching a video like we did yesterday, we brought out how the ancient Israelites would have had haplogroup E, just like the Akan have. So there you have it right there. And this is speaking on, right. Okay, so that's where that Jewish tombstone was found in South America. Right, my ancestry said Mali, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Bantu. All right, so Israelite all up in that. We know that the Israelites settled from Morocco all the way down to Cape Coast, South Africa. All right, the Israelites settled from Morocco all the way down to Cape Coast, South Africa. And if you want to, get a brief understanding about, where these people came from and how they got to Western Africa, just go check out the videos I've done in the past. But with that, I say shalom and told our family, thank you for tuning in and sticking with me through these videos. Hope you all enjoyed your Shabbat. And of course, until next time, shalom. Your junk said African ancestry, wait, no mind. Paternal side said 100% a con. Yeah, man, you're 100% a con. You a big Judite, man. You a big Judite. All praises, all praises. Shalom, shalom. See y'all next time.